There's a study in the UK. He said the young generation in the UK now is the least atheist generation. It's the oldest generation that is the most atheistic. The youngest generation are abandoning it. I just saw something that said church attendance among young people has quadrupled in the UK. Even in the US, there was a steady decline in church attendance up until about 4 years ago, and then it started going back up.
And I've been noticing, I've been going to the same Orthodox church for years, and it's been pretty much the same people. Every now and then there was a convert. Every now and then there would be a family moving in. But otherwise, I just see the same people week in and week out for years and years and years. And the last few weeks only, suddenly the place is filled with these young guys in their 20s and 30s that I've never seen before. And I think, oh, wow, I've been reading about this online, that people are coming to the Orthodox Church, and now I see it in my own parish.
Looking at my inbox, the number of testimonials that I get is telling me that amongst the conservative population of the UK, there is a definite revival. And because men tend to be more conservative than women, it's disproportionately landing amongst men than amongst women. What we're seeing in the Christian church is this weird phenomena where Christian women are moving further left and Christian men are moving further right, or traditional versus liberal in their understanding of the church. And my inbox testifies to this in terms of just the number of people that I've got sending me messages saying that I've become a Christian, I've started reading the Bible, I want to go to church, which church should I go to, which is the best Bible to read. Like, I get these messages all the time. And so it's definitely happening. And there's real research to prove it. I'm sure you've probably heard the Quiet Revival study done by the Bible Society. That was a study of 10,000 people. So this is actual, genuine research.
Something similar is at work elsewhere as well. Christianity's decline in U.S. appears to have halted, major study shows. So this is the decline of Christianity in the U.S. may have stopped. Downward trend started to slow around 2019. So you've got this going back to 2007, and you'll notice that the number of people who identify as Christian is close to 80%, just going back fewer than 2 decades. And that number slowly declines. That number slowly declines over time. We have a big drop right around 2018. So it goes from 67 down to 63. And then after that, though, so after 2019, then there's a little jump, and then the trend continues downward. And then for the past couple years, there's been an increase. So it bottomed out at 60% of people identifying as Christian, and then 62%, and now 63% as of 2024. Pretty interesting stuff there. And I found it interesting just because you guys had sent me your study from the UK. And even though they're talking about different reasons and so on, very similar results that I would not have expected if you had asked me what's going on. Now, I was expecting it in the future because I was expecting the sort of new atheism to be bottoming out. I started sensing it a couple of years ago when it was almost like they'd made all their predictions back in the early 2000s, and it was, hey, if we just get millions of people to leave Christianity, then we're going to become more scientific and more enlightened, and we're going to get smarter, and everything's going to get better, and the world's going to get better, and then everyone's going to see it, and then more people are going to want to become atheists because they see that atheism is doing everything better. Well, you've had a couple of decades of that now. Millions of young people became atheists over that time. And how has the world been improving at all? Which of your predictions has come true? And as far as I can tell, none of them. So the key findings here are young people are both more spiritual and more religious than older people. That would be the one that is most surprising to most people. They also report becoming more spiritual and more religious in the past 5 years. That's interesting as well. But it's something I've kind of noticed as well, this shift over the past couple of years. But I didn't expect it to be this decisive as far as like polling. 2, atheism appears to be most popular among people in the 40s and 50s. Younger people seem less interested. Also surprising. Also surprising. You would have expected atheism to be most popular among the youngest people, and it's not. And then 3, nevertheless, Britons young and old are highly critical of religion and pessimistic about its outlook. So if you were just looking at one or two, you might be thinking, Britain's in the middle of a revival and people are becoming Christian. Not so fast, not so fast.
Then, we got the sort of religious bit at the bottom there saying, Gen Z at 28%. The boomers, it's interesting that they are the least religious.
That's very interesting.
And, as you can see, the spiritualism is, or how spiritual you feel is something that definitely declines with age. So, I think we define spiritual as, do you feel that there's something bigger than yourself that matters in the world?
That's interesting. So guys, you see as far as people who identify as religious, consider themselves religious, look, the boomers, 11%. So wow. And then, but Gen Z, so the young people, they're almost 3 times higher. If you'd asked me a couple weeks ago, before I ever saw this, what to expect, I would have kind of expected the reverse of that.
Yeah.
I would have expected the boomers to be around, 28, 30% or something like that, and Gen Z to be like 11% or something. And then in the spiritual category, then all of a sudden you're talking well over half of Gen Z consider themselves spiritual and so on. So interesting stuff.
This is what the sort of religions look like in the UK. I mean, as I said, we're a bit more of an atheist country than the US. I mean, we've got 54% people identifying as Christian. We're probably a bit more of a Muslim country than the US.
Yeah. Islam in the US tends to hover around 1%. Even factoring in immigration and conversions to Islam, those are offset by the number of people who leave Islam. So it basically remains steady right around 1%.
Now, we have quite a lot of people from South Asia moving to the UK, and
that's very interesting. So guys, look at this. This is 62% of Gen Z are willing to listen to arguments in favor of religion, which means if you've been trained all your life, I don't know exactly what the situation in the UK is, but in the US, it's very common to be told as you're growing up, don't bring up religion, you're just going to offend someone. And then people kind of get programmed that it's mean to bring up religious issues as you're growing up. You're just going to offend somebody, where here looks like over half of Gen Z is willing to hear whatever case you've got. Like, hey, what's your argument? You got an argument for your position? Looks like over half would be willing to listen to that.
Yeah.
Right, the point there, ladies and gentlemen, was one, if you've got good number of people who are actually willing to listen, that means you shouldn't be terrified and you shouldn't buy into the stuff of you're just going to offend somebody. There are apparently plenty of people out there who'd be willing to listen. That means one, you should have an argument for your position ready. And 2, be ready to share it with people, because it looks like you've got an audience out there that's ready to listen. So if you look at top arguments against belief, well, there's no evidence of God's existence. Okay, so Judaism, Christianity, Islam, if you have a bunch of people who don't believe there's any evidence for your God, well, your God is pretty foundational to your religion, and so you got a problem with your religion in general if people think there's no evidence of God. And then religions are the cause of so much suffering. There, it's actually religions are a problem. Whereas if you look at the other side, we have a yearning to connect with something bigger, something like that. Well, that kind of makes sense of people going in the direction of spiritual, but not necessarily religious. You've got this yearning, you need something bigger, so you go in the spiritual direction, but you don't believe there's evidence for God's existence, and you believe that religions are harmful. These are interesting times, ladies and gentlemen, and some things are happening that you might not have expected, but we need to cover them. And I don't know, these could be some fun times ahead, ladies and gentlemen. Could be fun times ahead.